Welcome to our program, Mr. Davis.
Good to be with you.
I would like to begin our discussions with the result of current U.S. Local elections. Democrats have won New York City, New Jersey, and other important cities across the United States. Could this lead to any kind of democratic breakthrough next year? How could this influence the next year's House elections?
Well, it's a tradition in American politics, especially with the Congress, that the off-year election, that means a year that the president is not on the ballot to be elected, is considered a referendum or a kind of a grade or report card on that presidential administration. So you saw, for example, in 2022, Americans were unhappy with policies of the Biden administration and punished the Democrats. Republicans took the House of Representatives back. In 2018, we saw a situation where Democrats and voters wanted to punish the first Trump administration for a series of policies that had been enacted, and the same thing happened. Democrats won in that case about 40 seats, and Nancy Pelosi became the speaker again when the Democrats took the majority back, and then held that until 2022 when Republicans came back. So there's only been one time in our history where the off year saw the presidential office have pickups or increases in the number of their seats, and that was George Bush after 9/11. However, there are deeper issues that drove that change, and there was a reaction not only in New Jersey and in Virginia or with the California referendum on redistricting, as both parties seek to gain advantage by the way the congressional districts are drawn. The deeper issue was a public reaction first to the tariffs of the Trump administration, which, contrary to maybe some things the White House has said, have in fact increased prices. It's created a lot of pressure on our supply chains and the unpredictability of trade relationships. And so that was part of it. There's a long time saying in American politics, probably very similar in Ukraine, but it goes, all politics are local and ultimately have to do with personal economic issues of the voters who will decide an election. The second factor, I believe, that was there as well is people have been frustrated with some other policies of the administration, specifically around the government shutdown, which was, to be candid, as someone with a lot of political experience, was very poorly timed, simply because it had direct impact on voters in Virginia and in New Jersey specifically. And the thing that's important to look in the difference is the most important races for the Democrats was not New York City. That was going to be essentially a liberal mayor regardless, although Mr. Mamdani isn't a Democrat. He's a very committed socialist and doesn't understand the economics of why markets are important and state-controlled economies fail, not unlike your adversary Russia or what we've seen in other countries. However, so that's kind of a sidebar. The flip side is New Jersey and Virginia had very pragmatic, relatively moderate Democrats who ran, and they ran only on an economic message. They're moving away from the rather odd and eccentric or maybe crazy views promoting transgenderism and strange social policies on men and women. And the message that mattered, that cut through, was the economic message. And that's likely to play again next year in the races for Congress. I would suspect that the House will likely change sides to Democrats, but we will have to wait and see what the political climate looks like as next year unfolds.
And how can you assess the recent polls regarding the numbers of both parties ahead of the next year's election? which side has more chances to take the House?
I would say momentum is with the Democratic Party. And oddly enough, America's government, especially the Congress, often works the most effectively in what's called a divided government situation, where there's a different party in the White House than the Congress, or a different party in one of the House chambers, the House or Senate or congressional chambers, and the White House, because it forces negotiations to get things done. Essentially, everything in American politics comes down to a math problem. It takes 218 votes in the House, usually 60 votes in the Senate, unless it's what's called a reconciliation or a very budget-focused bill, not policy, and that's 51 votes. And then we have to have a president that would sign that legislation into law. And so if any of those numbers don't work, there is no policy. Consequently, we saw the delays in the shutdown votes that have taken place where Democrats did not provide enough votes to get over 60 to end the shutdown. That will end tonight. But polling moves rather quickly based on the mood of the people. National events, oftentimes in congressional races, local events will have big significance too. And we just have to see how that plays out. However, I think the most likely scenario is that Republicans hold the Senate narrowly and Democrats win the House. However, if national Democrats stay on the same kind of messages that they were on in the 2024 and the 2022 elections, again, on what's considered fairly radical social policy or on gender or Marxist economics or state-controlled economics, I think that they also have the potential to not take the House back. But the lesson of New Jersey and Virginia is be practical and speak to people's personal economic issues, and that's a winning issue. And I know that personally, as a candidate in a couple of very tough elections, it was the economic message that won the day.
Let's also cover current level of support for Ukraine among Republicans. According to recent article by the Wall Street Journal, even more Republicans support President Zelensky and military assistance to Ukraine. What has changed since this meeting in February in the White House between President Zelensky and Trump? How do you see the main reasons of such shift in support for Ukraine?
Well, there were several people close to the president who frankly are isolationists, and that meaning that they believe the United States should pull back. There was a lot of emotion behind the scenes after that terrible meeting in February. I can say quite honestly, as an American, a former American political leader, a former American military officer, I was embarrassed by that scene in the White House. I believe it disrespected the Ukrainian people and largely was informed by false information. The reality, though, is over the last several months that more and more truth has gotten to the American people. And for example, there is a number of Americans who've worked in Ukraine have made it a point to try to get these messages to American leaders, but also the American public. And that has helped immensely. The number that was most interesting to me was that 43% of committed so-called MAGA supporters, these are the very populist 1/3 of the Republican Party, now support aid to Ukraine, which is a significant breakthrough. And nationally, a majority of mainstream Republicans support that. A majority of Democrats support that. And once people hear a message on why this is important to help Ukraine, and they understand the risks for the free West, their opinion changes. And so I'm hopeful that that dialogue will continue. As I have shared in the past, the most important thing that Ukraine and friends of Ukraine can do is to energize and activate the Catholic communities in the United States and also the evangelical communities, especially reaching to women and women who are mothers over 40, makes a big, big difference in changing that perception. Because unfortunately, as you know, Russian propaganda has found its way into certain conservative outlets like Tucker Carlson, who's become a great disappointment to many Americans, and other media pundits. But as an illustration of what I think is more a desperate play from the Russian side, there was a very odd video released. It looked like the soldiers or Russian FSB troops with a mannequin and a head of the conservative Christian activist Charlie Kirk on it, tied to a tree, and they knocked the head off, posing as Ukrainian soldiers. This was clearly not Ukrainian soldiers that did that, and it's their attempt to restart this fire of anti-Ukraine feeling. But the reality is it's not had an effect. The reason they picked Charlie Kirk was he had shared some opinions that came directly from Tucker Carlson and some like-minded individuals who either like Russia or are completely ignorant of history. And I saw that as kind of a desperate move. But the fact the Russians are thinking that way means they understand the risk of perception of this war in America. So again, I would just reiterate as many outreaches as possible to Americans, to American Christians, to national security oriented people, and just ordinary folks, of explaining why this is a benefit from a Ukrainian perspective would be very, very helpful to maintain this support.
US President Donald Trump has imposed sanctions against two of Russia's biggest oil companies, Rosneft and Lukoil. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says that these sanctions could cost Russia up to $37 billion this year and up to $50 billion next year. Meanwhile, President Trump has cancelled his summit with Vladimir Putin in Budapest. What are the main reasons behind this Trump's shift on Putin, and could the sanctions bring Vladimir Putin to the negotiating table?
Well, I think that sometimes politics, as some of my friends have said, becomes kind of a manhood contest, personal reputations and emotion. And Vladimir Putin has tried to say friendly and kind things, patronizing or flattering Donald Trump since he was elected again a year ago. As the year has unfolded, especially since that terrible meeting with President Zelensky in February, the Russian government and Putin in particular has kind of held out an idea that he might be able to negotiate a solution, but they've never changed. And we've seen that with Lavrov, we've seen that with Putin, and they're making demands that are unreasonable. And I think finally President Trump was embarrassed, and he realized the fact that Putin was lying to him. No surprise in Ukraine or any of us that have studied Russia most of our lives. Russia is well known for never keeping any of their commitments, never honoring any treaty that they've made. And so I think that was a big motivator. I do wish that he would have taken it to the next level with Tomahawk missiles. I will say that the Tomahawks could not simply be shipped. There would be a training requirement. that would take some time to use those and the new launching systems. However, the economic hardship is real, and I think those of us that watch the Russian economy closely understand how weak it really is and how dangerously fragile it is. With each month that goes by, is less and less Russian potential for recovery in the long run. So sorry.
Just wanted to follow up question. How close we are to any kind of ceasefire deal in Ukraine from your perspective?
I think the best motivation for a ceasefire is a very, very strong military response on the part of Ukraine and the West. I believe that had the Tomahawk missiles been released a couple of weeks ago, that may have been sufficient, but the reality is what will bring Russia to the negotiating table is realizing that they are on the edge of a great catastrophe if their forces collapse. As my longtime friend and Army alumnus, General Ben Hodges, has said for a couple of years, it would not be surprising if this trend continues that Russia eventually encounters a 1917 moment where the troops rebel against the constant slaughter. I don't know whether that will happen or not. Certainly Ukraine and the West cannot plan for that. But I personally believe that the best way to get to a ceasefire is victory, sadly. Over and over, the Russian government has held out the bait to Trump to say, sure, we'll negotiate. And then when they come together, they always say their demand is the total subjugation of Ukraine for entirely false reasons. So at the end of the day, it's going to be very important for Europe and the United States to provide support and also to learn the lessons that the Ukrainian military, Ukrainian society is teaching us, helping us remember from our past times of conflict to be resilient, to maintain freedom of commerce, freedom of religion, and ultimately standing firm against the threat of a totalitarian and ultimately dying Russian nation.
You just mentioned about the possibility of coup against Putin's regime. According to Sky News reporting, Sergei Lavrov has been sidelined and probably has at least temporarily lost his seat at the Kremlin's top table as he overplayed his hand during his phone conversation with Marco Rubio, because after that, President Trump canceled Budapest summit. What is your take on that?
My view in general is that when somebody is removed, it's a way to place the blame somewhere other than Putin, who owns all the blame for this war and everything related to it economically. I do not know what actually has happened to Lavrov. I've seen that story that you mentioned. I also saw things on Twitter saying he was dead. I suppose if he falls out a window, we will know that he's been removed. But Putin has a habit of just moving around his inner circle. Look at Mr. Gerasimov as an example, is still in the mix in leadership, despite the fact that he's incompetent and is personally responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Russian men in the war. But if that in fact is true, that is a sign of the growing challenges that the Kremlin has. I'm not so sure there will be a coup, largely because so many people who might exercise independence have been removed from that inner circle over the years. However, the bigger question is when the Russian people realize they cannot get gasoline, they cannot get bread, They don't have the ability to move freely, and inflation takes over as the economy collapses further. Then anything is possible. I think one of the most important things that Ukraine has done, and quoting your president, I suppose, saying the best sanctions are Flamingo missiles and your long-range attacks on energy infrastructure, energy transport, on their rail system, on the ability to produce drones and ordnance, as well as limiting gains on the front lines, will help weaken that as well.
Thank you, Mr. Davis, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Glory to Ukraine. Thank you for having me.